Hi there, it's Carl Irwin, the Common Magician. I want to have an interesting discussion with you. This is really going to be a discussion more so than a tutorial about a concept I've talked about before, a concept that I've written about in my book on any card at any number. And I want to kind of really tip this off here and have an in-depth sort of discussion about the possibilities on a particular topic. So before we get to that, though, we need to do a bit of a demonstration so that we can have some context for what we're going to talk about here. I've got a deck of cards here. This is not a trick. This is truly a random deck of cards, randomly shuffled deck of cards, and we're going to use this because you're not here. I would need you to make a few choices, and you can't do that. So in order to get choices that I don't have any control over, we'll have to use this deck of cards. And also I have a die here that we'll use for some general kind of choices if we need to. We may not need that at all, but we'll see what we get here. The first thing we want to do is we want to pick a we're going to select a playing card, but we want to make sure that we come up with something that truly is random. It is not a predictable choice that someone would make if they were asked to just name a playing card. If you do that, if you ask someone to do that, there's sort of a hierarchy, a list of cards, and there's really about 6 or 7 that are extremely likely to take up the largest percentage of options that people will name. They will just name one of these, handful of cards, and it's quite predictable. And of course, people will pick outliers beyond those, but these are very predictable. We don't want that. We want truly random choice. So in order to do that, we're going to start broad and kind of narrow down until we come up with a value and a suit. So I have a deck of cards here that is shuffled. First, we need to pick a value, and I might do this a little differently if I had someone here to ask questions for, but just kind of basically the quickest way there is just to kind of cut or riffle into this, and whatever value we end up at, ace through king, is the value that we'll use. So I'll just kind of dribble here and stop. We'll stop right there. Whatever value we have on the face is the value we'll use. We end up with a 4. So we're going to use a 4 out of ace through king. It could have been one of any of the 4 types of those values. We ended up with a 4. So keep that in mind. 4 is our value. The next thing we want is we need to determine a suit, but let's do this kind of slowly. Let's go for a color first. So we have black, we have red. If we have black, we have spades, clubs. If we get red, it's diamonds, hearts that we can choose from. So just to make sure we give ourselves the greatest opportunity to really get a random choice, whatever card we stop at, we'll take that color and we'll go from there. So if I dribble in and I stop right here, whatever this is the color we'll use, and it's the same card. We'll do it again. It was unpredictable. We'll do this again. And just so you don't feel that this was set up in any way, black, it is still black. So black is going to be the color, and I'll just give these a shuffle so we don't hit the same spots again. So we have black, that's spades and clubs. So 4, it will either be 4 of clubs or it'll be the 4 of spades. We don't know what it'll be. So let's see what we end up at here. So the 4 of, and if this is a spade or a club, we'll use that. If it's a heart or a diamond, we'll just go again. It's a heart, we'll try again. And we'll stop here. Diamond again. Eventually we'll hit a black card. Heart. Clubs. 4 of clubs. Okay, so that is the card that we're going to go for. The next question I have is going to be related to a value. We have 52 positions within the deck in a deck that's sitting in this box right here. I'm not going to open it up or touch it. It's already been shuffled and put in there. And we want to come up with some kind of value, but again, we don't want to depend on a predictable outcome, a predictable choice. We're going to kind of slow play this so that we come up with a value that nobody could have predicted and would not have been psychologically forced in any way. Okay, so first of all, I just ask, we're going to eliminate a whole bunch of cards here. We're going to start broad and then focus down. We want to cut out a whole bunch all in whack here. The question is do you want to go with the higher cards in the deck or the lower cards? So I have a die here to represent higher and lower. 1 through 3 would be lower, 4 through 6 would be higher. So we'll do this, and it says 5, so we'll go with the higher cards. So those are the cards kind of near the top. And we'll just take it down to like the 1 through 20, just the first 20 cards, and we'll eliminate the rest of them. Very good choice. And again, we want to kind of focus down into the middle of that range and just kind of narrow down to a value. So we'll kind of take something right in the middle there, maybe somewhere around, I don't know, like 13, 14, 15, 16, 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there. Can you just pick a number to cut at? Where would you like to cut at? And we'll roll the die here. If we get, you know, the 3, 4, 5, or 6, we'll take whatever that is. And we roll, it is the 5. So we're looking at 15. We're going to cut to that point in this deck of cards. It's been sitting here. So let's just take the cards and we'll open it up. Fairly random choices here. And we're going for 15. 15 is where we're going. So from the top, we'll just count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and we'll cut 15. That's our cut point. And then this is where we arrived at. And you can see again, this is, you know, random choice. Completely free and random. This is where we ended up at. And if you remember the card that we selected at the beginning, it was the 4 of clubs. And indeed, we have here the 4 of clubs. So that's the demonstration. Let's talk about what this is, what's going on. Again, it's not a new topic. We've talked about this before. I've written about it. But I want to talk about it more in depth here openly on the channel about how this idea of large set equivoque can be used. So we're talking about doing equivoque, the sort of magician's choice force, but using a large, extremely large sets of options and various tactics in order to accomplish this. So first of all, what we need, at least for this demonstration, is we are operating with a stack. That goes without saying. So I have already a set stack here that is set up inside the box, and you can use whatever stack you want, but that is, you have to know, at least with this application, there are probably other applications for this kind of procedure, but if you're going to do the, you know, card at any number, any card at any number, or the sort of open prediction kind of feat, you would need to have a stack, because one of the prerequisites to this is that you have to have a knowledge base, a known order from which you can navigate and force to. Okay, so that's the priority. We have to have that. So we have a stack. These are the things that I think are essential to this tactic. I have some notes written out here. I thought of eight sort of rules that you need to follow to do this procedure. So I call this the 52 Corral, and it's kind of like corralling cats, herding cats, right? It's taking a bunch of different free agents and trying to get them kind of into one place, into a predictable situation where you can control the outcome, right? A group of choices that are otherwise unpredictable and open for the choosing, and trying to get the spectator to kind of narrow in and pick the one you want and get them where you want. It's a pretty big feat, but I think if you follow a few guidelines, it's pretty easy to do, especially if you practice a little bit. So first of all, you want to begin with a broad, ambiguous premise. Okay, so begin with a broad, ambiguous premise. Equivoque is ambiguous questioning, right? The ambiguity of the choices allow the performer to control the outcome. So you want to begin with a broad, ambiguous premise that you can follow, something that kind of sets up the rules for what's about to happen. And these rules are very vague. The rules seem like it's a controlled procedure, but the vagueness of the rules allow you to have control over what happens next in the procedure. Okay, so broad, ambiguous premise. So I like to use this one. We're going to start big and broad and then focus down to a selection. I might say we're going to start big, and through a process of elimination, we're going to focus down to a choice. Sometimes I'll say that because it leaves me the opportunity to eliminate as choices are being made. And that's very useful, because ideally that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be trying to get rid of all the stuff we don't want. You can think of it as, I once heard someone talk about chainsaw carving, a bear out of a big stump, right? And how in the world do you do that? How do you come up with this fine carving out of this big piece of wood? And the artist replied, well, I just cut away everything that doesn't look like a bear, right? And that's what we're doing. We're trying to cut away all of the things that doesn't suit our outcome, and we need to have that latitude. So big ambiguous premise. We're going to start big and broad. Through elimination, we're going to focus down to a selection. That kind of sets up the rules, but it doesn't really tell us a lot, and that's where we want to be. So number one, begin with a broad, ambiguous premise. And this prevents fixation on a specific choice, right? We don't want the spectators to fixate on an outcome by kind of discounting the idea that we don't want them to go for those automatic responses. We don't want them to go for the typical answers. We get them not to fixate on the Queen of Hearts. That's what we don't want. We don't want them to fixate. So we're not going to allow them to make any such decision. We're going to make them do only or engage in only big, broad decisions as we focus them down to something that's more specific. 2, create a shell of truth. Create a shell of truth by surrounding the force with completely fair choices that look similar. So we want to take the spectators through a scenario where they are making choices that are absolutely, completely fair, but they look a lot like the forced choices they're going to be making. We want to make the shell of truth so that the spectator goes through a procedure first where they say, well, that was really fair. There's nothing set up about that. I didn't feel compelled to do anything. I made free choices. I could have changed my mind. In fact, maybe I did, and I made my choices. We need to have not just one layer of that. We need to have multiple layers of that, and not just at the beginning, but also at the end. We need to have kind of a surrounding barrier of fairness, and then in the middle of the sandwich, in the middle of the pastry, right, is the good stuff, is the force. Okay, so create a shell of truth by surrounding the force with completely fair choices that look similar to the force itself. So an example of this is that, if a number from 1 to 52 needs to be forced, but a card can be freely thought of, be sure to take the spectator through a fair process of card selection that looks similar to the forced process of the number selection. So that's what we did here. I forced the number down to 15 is where we ended up at. There was a force that got us to that area, but the card selection was totally fair. It seems like the number selection was fair too, but it wasn't. It was actually forced, and it looks the same. They look very similar. The procedures kind of lined up. Okay, so the choice of the card looks fair, but instead of just saying name any card, we go through a procedure. We follow our premise, our ambiguous premise. We say we're going to start big and then focus down. First of all, come up with a value. And if I had a person here, I might make that even longer with the value. I might say, well, let's pick odds or evens, or let's go for number cards or picture cards. What do you prefer? Imagine there's a continuum here, right? And we have ace through king, and I'm just going to move my hand. You tell me when to stop. Well, we're around the 7, 8, 9 range. Which one do you want? 7, 8, or right? You might do something like that where there really are true choices being made that help later on when we do some equivoque that looks just like that, looks exactly the same. So 2, create a shell of truth. Number 1, begin with a broad, ambiguous premise. Number 2, create a shell of truth surrounding the force so that the force goes unnoticed and unseen and undetectable, indetectable. Number 3, make the first choice completely ambiguous if possible. So when you get to the point where you have to do equivoque, make the very first choice extremely ambiguous. Don't say choose this and then either keep it or eliminate it. That's often how equivoque works. I think you should take 10 steps back from there and have an initial question that is so ambiguous that you have total freedom with how you describe it. So you want to avoid surprise eliminations. I think it's extremely off-putting to have, for a spectator, to have that moment where they're asked to make a choice and you say, okay, we'll get rid of that. Right? That's a very frequent equivoque tactic, and I don't think you ever should do that. Never eliminate a choice. I should talk about, too, at this point, good sources for equivoque, kind of lower level 3-4 choice equivoque, the way we normally think about it. Hector Chadwick has a little short talk that he did that you can purchase at many magic vendors. You can look him up, where he talks about equivoque and goes over kind of the holy grail sort of situation and how to design an equivoque routine that can be as good as you can make it. He begins with the premise that equivoque is not the best method in the world, but it can be made usable, and he goes through kind of some of these things I'm talking about at the more basic level. So that's 1. 2 is anything by Max Maven where he talks about equivoque. Max Maven is just the best. He's just the best at this. So much of his material depends heavily on equivoque. He can get a spectator to do anything he wants. I've seen video of him where he does routines where things go wrong on television, and through equivoque he gets it right. He just fixes it all. He gets what he wants. Brilliant stuff. So anything by Max Maven on equivoque, you want to look at that. So you want to avoid surprise eliminations. That's something they talk about in their material. Don't eliminate things that spectators choose. Have more ambiguity in your questions. So an example of this is what we did here. I said, do you want to use the higher or the lower cards? That has no meaning. It has no meaning, right? I have a geographic flexibility, flexibility in geography here of the cards. Am I talking about physically the cards that are up here versus the cards that are lower down here? Or am I talking about numerical values, 1 being low and 50 being high? What am I talking about? I don't say. I just say, you want to use the higher cards, the lower cards. Again, we're thinking big, we're thinking broad, just pick one. I'm not asking you to pick a number. I'm just saying which one do you want to use, right? We're going back to that ambiguous premise. We're starting broad, and then we're going to focus down. So this is a big, broad question. Do you want to use the higher or the lower cards, right? And no matter what they say, I can make it what I want. So in the case here, we went with, I can't even remember what this said, but whatever it was, I needed to get to that range of 1 through 20. I needed to get to something that was in there. So that's what I did. I eliminated a whole bunch after that, and I got us to that point. I think it was higher. I think it was 4 or something. I can't remember what it came out of, but it said higher. So I said, oh, these top cards, the higher ones, right? And I don't go out of my way to explain that over and over again. I just say it one time and then I describe it. Okay, so make the first choice completely ambiguous if possible. Avoid surprise eliminations. Another example might involve, see, I wrote down here, what would you like to remove from the card box? The odds or the evens, right? The reds or the blacks. The idea of removal is completely ambiguous because it doesn't indicate that you're discarding or using, right? What do you want to remove figuratively from the card box? What do you want to take out of the card box? Imagine you have a deck of cards sitting here. What would you like to take out? The number cards or the picture cards? They say the number cards. You say, okay, we'll remove those. We'll get rid of those. That leaves us with the picture cards. Or they say the picture cards. You say, okay, we'll take out the picture cards, and we can see that we have jacks, kings, and queens. Either way you use that, removal is a completely ambiguous premise, right? It allows you to do whatever you want. You can use it to discard, or you can use it to use, to focus on. So make the first question as ambiguous as possible, and go with that. Yeah, again, having a spectator choose a set and then eliminating that set as the outcome is jarring. Don't do it. Try to avoid that as much as you can. Avoid that like the plague. Just don't even do it. I know a lot of people practice equivoque that way, but it is completely unnecessary. There's no reason to do that. There are better ways, right? 4, avoid repeating ambiguities that are similar and may demonstrate inconsistency in the outcome. Don't give the same option more than one time. Okay, so if you do this remove from the card box gag, don't do that again, right? If you say remove the number cards or the picture cards or the red or the black, and they remove the red and you want them to use the black, say, okay, we'll get rid of the red. Don't say, okay, would you like to remove from the box the evens or the odds? Because you may have to do the opposite. You need to come up with a different tactic. So the different tactic would be the same idea, but a different wording, a different geography to the situation. We started with the card box and removing something from it to either use or get rid of. Then you go to, okay, we're holding on to these. What would you like to pick out? Now that's the same ambiguous question, but it has a completely different geography to it. We can do this differently, right? They say we'd like to pick out the queens. You say, okay, we'll pick out those queens and take a look at them. Or, okay, we'll pick those out. We have the kings and the jacks now we're looking at, right? You get to play the same gag, but there's no similarity in it because we're not doing the same thing. We're doing something new. We've moved on to a different procedure entirely. So avoid repeating ambiguities that are similar and may demonstrate inconsistency in the outcome. Make sure each step goes to a different technique, a different tactic. Okay. So 1, begin with a broad ambiguous premise. 2, create a shell of truth by surrounding the force with completely fair choices that look similar to the force. 3, make the first choice completely ambiguous if possible, so you have the most control. 4, avoid repeating ambiguities that are similar and may demonstrate inconsistency of the outcome. Number 5, divide sets nearly in half with each choice. So one of the biggest problems with dealing with large sets in ambiguous questioning and in equivoque is that there's too many. There's too many to use, right? You don't want to say, okay, slide away 3, and you got all these other cards to deal with. What you want to do is you want to try to come up with categories that cut everything nearly in half or better. So some of these categories, some of these groups you might establish would be red or black, odds or evens, groups like that. Number cards and picture cards is pretty good. It doesn't really cut it in half, but it does get rid of, it's a good force for picture cards. That's an excellent force for picture cards because it's going to be the smaller set that you want to get to, and that's something I'll talk about here in a minute, another tactic, another item we need to talk about. But that does cut up into large chunks, okay? So the higher or lower cards is one of those. You can really cut the deck in half with that question. So try to divide sets nearly in half with every single choice. Try to cut things down in big, throw a bunch away every time you get closer, okay? And also do this, if you can divide sets in half in the equivoque, divide sets in half in the fair questions, right? So like when you're doing the card choice and that was all fair, go with red and black, right? Add those layers in there because you're going to be doing the same thing later on for the equivoque part. So make sure that you're using these large sets that you're going to be discarding or using in the fair choices as well. That's part of making that shell of truth. I'm giving away a lot here, so hopefully you appreciate it. I don't know. Okay. 6. Use arbitrary justification to define choices and decrease the size of chosen sets when possible. Use arbitrary justification to define choices. Okay, so we're defining the choices they make. They make a choice, but we're going to further define it and thereby refine it, get it kind of closer to where we want to be. And we're going to use arbitration to kind of get rid of stuff we don't need. Okay, so arbitrary justification, this is the part that some of you may have a hard time with and you may disagree with, but this really does work. I find that you can just arbitrarily kind of corral people into a new process of selection. Just kind of arbitrary choices that you make kind of shrink everything down. So some examples of this: you can shrink the size of the chosen set by defining the boundaries more narrowly after the choice. So I did that in this example. If we went with the higher cards, and I said, oh, the cards near the top one, we'll go with the first 20. I cut a whole bunch out, right? I made it much smaller than what it should be. It should be like 26, 27, but I cut it a little bit more shy. If the choice I needed to get to was a little higher, I might have gone with 1 through 30 so that I could focus into the middle of that. But you have flexibility on how you define the outcome. So try to use arbitrary justification to make it the best case scenario in your outcome, using arbitration. Just say what it is. Just call it what you want it to be. I think it's good to work in kind of whole numbers. You don't want to just say, let's go with 1 through 18, right? Yeah, I think you want to go with 20, go with 30. You could say, let's go with these higher numbers, these higher cards. We'll say maybe 10 through 30. I think you could probably do something like that, right? We'll focus in on there and get rid of the first 9 cards. You probably could get away with something like that because you're still dealing with a very big set. There's nothing really alarming about it because there's so many choices yet left to go. Remember your premise. That's why you set up the broad ambiguous premise, because that allows you to do this kind of stuff, to make arbitrary choices on behalf of the spectator. Okay. Another example is if a forced object is in the middle of a given set. That happened in this. Then you can ask the spectator to focus in on the middle choices of that set. So I arbitrarily forced us into the middle of 1 through 20, middle-ish, right? And it's not even really the middle. I just kind of said, oh, it's 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere around there, right? Let's focus in on that. And that was part of my broad ambiguous premise, right? We're going to start big and then focus down. So I'm using this terminology again. We're going to focus down. So you can set up a new set arbitrarily, make choices for them to choose from. Another example, use a previous choice to drive the current selection. So let's say that the number I wanted to get to is maybe 1 through 5. And they said higher cards in the beginning. I say, okay, we'll go with the higher cards, and let's say 1 through 20. Can you just pick a point to cut at somewhere in the middle in there, and then say something like 9 or 10? You say, great, so we'll cut at 10, and we have this, say 1 through 9 here. And just like before, you said go with the higher cards. So let's do the same thing. Let's just focus in on the higher cards in that range. Let's say maybe 2, 3, 4, and 5. 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in that neighborhood. So what I'm doing is I'm using a previous choice that they made to go with the higher cards, and I'm forcing them into the more advantageous numbers in the set we've come up with by using the choice they already made, right? Conversely, I could say, so that gives us the top 20 cards. Let's do the opposite. You said the higher cards, so let's focus in on the opposite, the lower cards. There, the lower cards in the stack, and we'll go with say somewhere around 17, 18, 19, and 20. Focus in on that area, right? So arbitrary justification means using some kind of device to justify what you're going to narrow down to, okay? You have to practice this because there are these options, either the middle of the set, the front of the set, or the back of the set, and even defining the parameters of the set entirely. So this is something you want to practice. The goal here really is to get down to that as quickly as possible, to get through some arbitrary justification and then get kind of down to the end where they do make a fair choice, which we'll talk about in a second. So again, 1, begin with a broad, ambiguous premise. 2, create a shell of truth by surrounding the force with completely fair choices that look like the force. Do a lot more fair choices than you do with the force procedures. 3, make the first choice completely ambiguous if possible. Make it so broad that you have total control over how you describe their choice. Do that if possible. 4, avoid repeating ambiguities that are similar and may demonstrate inconsistency in the outcome. Make sure that each new phase is unlike the previous one so that they can't catch on to the equivoque. And you want to have as few equivoque steps as possible. You want to only have 2. 3 is really pushing it. If you're doing equivoque for 3 steps, even if you've done 10 fair ones, you're really getting out on the edge. You want to get down to fairness as quickly as you can again. 5, divide sets nearly in half with each choice. Try to get rid of as much as possible. So when they make a choice, try to discard as much as you can to make things a lot tighter. Okay, cut it down in half each time. 6, use arbitrary justification to define each choice and decrease the size of the chosen sets when possible. Okay, so you can just arbitrarily justify how you're going to define this. Just make decisions on their behalf and use vague justifications for it and just get through that. Get to the next step. 7, allow for chance hits by withholding the rules of the selection process. Do not spell out what you're going to do piece by piece. Make sure you're always in... It should seem at the beginning with your ambiguous premise that this procedure is well defined, but it isn't. Okay, don't spill the beans about what you're going to do next. Make sure that you always have flexibility. So allow for chance hits by withholding the rules of the selection process. For example, if I said, which do you like to go with, the higher or the lower cards? They say the lower cards. I say, great, we'll go with the lower numbers. We'll say, 1 through 20. Pick a number in there somewhere in the middle to cut at, a cut point. And I'm actually shooting for 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there, right? And they say 9. Just by chance, I hit it. Now, I could have, if it was some other number, I could have gone with that to eliminate either that number, 1 to that number or that number to the end and gone to a different route and focused in on another area. But I just by chance, I got a hit there and I can stop at that point, right? There's no need to go any further. I say, great, we're going to cut at that point. So we'll cut at 8, okay? And we'll go through the process. So allow for chance hits by withholding the rules of the selection process. Always be ready to stop the procedure when a hit occurs. When a hit occurs, you want to be done. You want to move on with that. No, don't do more than you have to. Use the words cut to or cut at. Where do you want to cut? Name a number where you cut. That's what you want to say. Don't allow them to pick a number. Allow them to pick a place to cut. And you notice that's how this went. We ended up cutting at 15. I cut 15. And then that's where we were left off at, was the card we cut to, which is actually 16. So make sure you're not allowing them to pick a number. You're really picking a place. You want to allow for chance hits by withholding rules and trying to keep the rules under thumb so that they don't pigeonhole you. You want to make sure you always have flexibility. So cut to is better than using words like pick, choose, or select. You don't want them to select a number. You don't want them to pick a number. You don't want them to choose a number. You want them to pick a point to cut at. Cutting at a number allows not only for that number to be revealed, but also it could be the next position. It gives you flexibility of 2 whenever you cut at a spot. So that was number 7. 8, the last one. Again, you'll want to watch this several times. And again, I probably lost a bunch of you. You said, this is just too much for me. There's no way this works. This does work, okay? I've done this for quite a few people over the last year or so, and it's shocking how well this works. And at the end, I'll talk about when you don't want to do this, who this doesn't work for. This won't work for some people, but it works for a lot. Number 8, use multiple outs for the final choice. This is crucial. Do this whenever possible. You don't have to do this. You can end with your equivoque. That's how equivoque typically does work. But one of the best ways to use equivoque is to use it in conjunction with multiple outs so that you're getting down to a free selection at the end. There really is a free choice. And that's how this went. The spectator really could have chosen, what did I say, 13, 14, 15, or 16. Any one of those could have been used because I had a multiple out scenario. The scenario that I'm using is that I have on the top of the stack, I have 2 jokers sitting there. And I can either get rid of these jokers, right? Take the cards out and take the jokers off the top, set them aside without any discussion, and then count. And that gives me either the number I count to or the next one. Or I could have left the jokers on and count, and that gives me either the number I count to or the next one in 2 steps away, right? So it's a total of 4 possible outs that I was using there. So use multiple outs for the final choice when possible, because multiple outs is a fair choice. When you have multiple outs, the spectator, the last choice they make is truly fair. They could have truly picked, and they'll remember that. Well, I could have picked any number I wanted. That's how they'll recall it. And I picked 15. That's what I picked. I could have picked something else, but I picked 15. I can't understand what happened here. Okay, so make sure that you use multiple outs for the final choice when possible. That's critical in creating that shell of truth, right? The final step in creating a shell of truth can most effectively be applied via multiple outs at the end, such as with 3 or 4 options at the end that could be offered, and all of them will fit the same revelation, right? So, and finally, choose from A, B, or C, where A, B, or C will show exactly the same end, or equally magical outcomes. It might not be the same revelation, but you would get kind of equal opportunity magical effects, right? If I've did this quite some time ago where I have some coins, I take coins out of my pocket, I say, pick any coin you want. What coin do you want to use, right? And they say the penny. You say, great, we'll use the penny here. And you make it vanish and you say it's underneath your glass. And they pick up the glass and it's there. Well, the reality in that is that I have any one of those denominations hidden at various points on the table. It's a multiple out, free choice, free selection, but it's a little detail that makes this really impossible. I'm using the duplicate method, but the fact that they had a choice in the denomination makes it seem a little bit impossible, more impossible, because they got to choose the coin. why would there be a duplicate if they got to choose? Well, I had one for every one, right? I had multiple outs there. So I had an equally magical outcome no matter what the choice was. That's another way to do it. So you could have A, B, and C be the same thing, or you could have A, B, and C be equally magical options. So in your equivoque, when you get to the very end and you have multiple outs, those are your two options. Either the multiple choices do the same thing, like with this situation here in the Jokers, or you get to equally magical outcomes. So review. Large set equivoque, the 52 Corral. How do you do equivoque with big numbers? And you can do this with the card selection too. There are ways to do that, and I talked a little bit about that. Choices, what would you like to remove from the deck, starting with that, and you get yourself down to 12 possible outs right from there. What would you like to pick out? That gets you down to queens right away, so that's 4 possible outs that you get to just in 2 equivoque questions, and they get to choose a real suit at the end. So that's the multiple outs, and if you have a setup for the queen. So this works for anything. Large set equivoque can work. So 1, begin with a broad, ambiguous premise. We are going to start big, and then we're going to eliminate some stuff and then focus down to a choice. And we know that it's going to be fair, and we know that it's going to be random, because you're not just going to give me your gut instinct that I can probably predict. You're not going to give me one of those answers that I expect to come from people that we've learned over history to just answer, right? Queen of Hearts, whatever. We're going to start big and then focus down. So I'm just going to ask you big questions, and we're going to work our way down, and we'll get to something. Whatever you say is what we'll do. Big premise. Lots of opportunity there for you to control. 2, create a shell of truth by surrounding the force with completely fair choices that look similar. Do some fair choices in another selection or part of the selection that look just like the same procedures that you're doing for the equivoque force. It's a shell of truth. They can't differentiate between the equivoque and the fair choices. They'll get lost in that. It's a great tactic. 3, make the first choice completely ambiguous if possible. Make sure you have the most control on the first choice, because that first one gives you the greatest opportunity to narrow down to a set that you can manage. Okay. 4, avoid repeating ambiguities that are similar and may demonstrate inconsistency in the outcome. Make sure that each step of your procedure is different. I try to think about equivoque as moving objects. If I'm doing good equivoque on the table, it would be I've got these 3 objects. Go ahead and push 2 of them away, right? Go ahead and push 1 back. This is the same thing. I'm asking them to move stuff around. I'm not asking them to choose anything. I'm just asking them to move things. So you want to do the same kind of thing here with these choices in a large set. But each time we want the choices to be different so that they don't catch on. Okay? We don't want to do the same shtick for each choice, because the outcome might have to be different. And if you're doing the same thing and the outcome is different on that same question, they're on to you. They've got it figured out. Divide, number 5, divide sets nearly in half with each choice. Try to get rid of as much as possible. Okay? Make sure that you're always working in big groups until you get down to something that's manageable. Cut it in half every time so that you sort of reverse exponentially get down to your end in as few steps as possible. 6, use arbitrary justification to define the choices that they're making and decrease the size of the chosen set. So arbitrarily justify it. This is the hardest part to swallow, but it's my favorite part, right? When dealing with numbers, if you're going to do this kind of any card to any number sort of situation, I think of one of 3 options. Again, in review, I want to focus in on the middle of a set, I want to focus in on the beginning of a set, or I want to focus in near the end of a set. I can justify this by my ambiguous premise. In focusing into the middle of a set, I say, let's focus down to the middle of that group, right? That's what I said earlier, so I can justify it by saying it again. Let's focus down in the middle of that. We have these numbers kind of in the middle there. I'm thinking of like, 12, 13, 14, 15, somewhere around in there. Go ahead and pick one of those to cut at. Where would you like to cut? Right? So focus down in the middle. The second one is focus on the front end. And I can justify this based on the choice they made at the beginning. Would you like to use the higher or the lower cards? If they said the higher ones, you can justify the opposite. Say, well, last time we did the higher ones. Let's focus down on the lower ones here. So I'm thinking of these numbers are kind of in that range. And be vague about that. Kind of in that range. You don't have to go all the way to the end of the set if your choices are a few back from there, right? So I'm thinking of these are kind of down in that range there, right? Or if they said higher before, you can say, you said higher before. Let's stick with that. That was a good choice. Let's focus on these higher cards. I'm thinking of these ones kind of in that range, and you name a few. So arbitrary justification to narrow down and define. Now you don't want to do this over and over again, but you can get away with it once to get yourself down to a range. 7, allow for chance hits by withholding the rules of the selection process. Do not give up what's coming next because they may have a hit and you want to be able to end the process and you need to be able to behave as if that was what we were going for. That's the end of the procedure. Good job. Okay, and we've arrived where we want to be. You don't want to pretend like you're cutting it short or you're stopping early. You just want to be able to take advantage of those chances. So withhold information that allows you to do that. And you need to behave as if this was exactly what was supposed to happen. And the last thing, number 8, use multiple outs for the final choice whenever possible. Equivocate is best served whenever you do that, especially when we're doing this large sets. We've done a bunch of selections at the beginning that were completely fair. We want to end with a fair selection. So we're looking at multiple outs in that scenario. So you can find some way to employ that. And whatever you're doing, however you want to use this kind of strategy, this sort of psychological management strategy, end with a fair selection that you have coverage for. That will make this look better, far, far better than if the last thing they do is highly suspect. You want to bury the suspect stuff earlier, okay? So that's what I've got for you on this topic. Trying to think if there's a few other things really to talk about related to this topic. I guess one thing to note is, who do you do this for? Well, most anybody. This can be done for most anybody, but you don't want to do this for hecklers. If you're dealing with people that are difficult, this doesn't work because some people won't be patient with the process. They'll say, well, why don't you just let me pick? I want the 4 of clubs. That's the one I want. No, well, I want 15. I don't care about this. Just 15, right? You don't want to deal with those people. So you want to avoid probably your closest family and friends that give you a hard time, right? You want to deal with people that are a little bit more affable to procedure. You can control this a little bit in the beginning by just being firm on the terms. We're not going to do this. We want to do this in a very specific way. We want to try to make sure that what you come up with is not predictable. Okay, because whatever you say right now, whatever you choice, I guarantee you it's something that I could have predicted. People are predictable. But if we do this in this broad premise, and we start big and we narrow it down, I can guarantee you that nobody would have guessed that you're going to end up there, even you. You can just kind of lay down the law and do this even with some of those people. But in general, I don't perform magic for hecklers. I mean, people that are going to give you a hard time. They hate magic. They just hate the process. Really, they don't say that out loud, but really that's where they're at. They don't like it. They don't want to be fooled. They don't want to look that way. They feel like it's degrading. And unless you can get them to a point where they accept your rules and your premise, you're going to have a hard time, so avoid that. So the second thing I think is worth talking about is, it's been nearly 50 minutes or almost an hour on this. The procedure should be quick. it's taken me a lot of time to talk about it. In the beginning, doing it with the cards and the die, that's a lot slower than what it really would be, right? So it shouldn't take more than a minute or two, minute 30 seconds, I think, for the selection process. It ought to be engaging. It ought to be something that's kind of building tension and interest. You don't want this to drag on, right? People talk about these kinds of tricks, like in any card at any number. These kinds of tricks where you have to count cards. Magicians say, I hate any kind of trick where I have to count cards. Well, you don't know how to count cards. That's your problem. That's my opinion, right? You don't know how to say, oh, this is going to be good. Go ahead and deal the cards face up right there. Let's count them out. Everybody, let's count them out loud, right? If you don't know how to build tension and interest, no wonder you hate those kinds of tricks, and probably the people you perform for hate them too. You don't know how to manage the tension, right? You don't know how to increase it and increase the engagement. So you need to make this engaging. You need to make this feel like you're headed somewhere. If you do this in a very boring and slow and convoluted and confusing way, and if you don't behave like the spectator is making progress in their decisions and you're getting down to what you need, right, to finish it, then this isn't going to work. Okay, so be brisk with this. Know your strategies inside and out. You need to practice this and play out all of the possibilities so you have a plan. If the spectator picks, if you're using this for any card, any number, then the spectator picks the top one or two cards, or the bottom one or two cards. If they're close to one side, you shouldn't even bother picking a number. You should do a different revelation, right? You got to know that that's a possibility. You need to practice that so that you know all of the possible outcomes. And whatever they pick, and whatever the free selection is at the beginning, you know the strategy you need to get to where you need to be, and you just employ it. You just automatically click into the next thing. So don't perform for hardcore hecklers. Perform for people that respect engagement and participation. And this would work, even for people that are skeptical and critical. I think the equivoque is so buried in there that it seems to work. I've done this on people that shouldn't fall for it, and they go for it. It works out really well. I've never had anybody catch on to it in the last year that I've been doing this, and I've done it quite a bit. And I've done it. This will blow your mind. I've actually done it more than one or two times in front of people that I've done it for, and they don't notice that the rules are changing, right? The procedure seems the same to them because of the ambiguity of it. So there is a lot of flexibility in there, but avoid hardcore hecklers and be brisk with it and keep it engaging. That's my advice to you. So large set equivoque, the 52 Corral, herding cats, trying to use just equivoque to force numbers and positions and make it a completely true hands-off free selection kind of experience. It doesn't have to be any card at any number. It can be any other kind of effect that uses the same kind of premise. That's what I've got for you. Large set equivoque. I'm giving up an awful lot with that. It's a good chapter in my ACAAN book, and hopefully you find this useful. A lot more depth than the first time we talked about this way back when, nearly a year ago. So good luck with that, and happy magicking.